Coming up next on the politics of politics.
The point of departure should be to remove the ANC government come these elections.
The processes for the Section 89 impeachment for President Ramaphosa with regards to the Phala issue. You guys are punching above your weight.
Look, in our view as a party, there's a lot of things that we've done in the past 5 years. Obviously, the question relating to Phala, because it relates to the conduct of the president.
The issue of disparity between Khayelitsha and and Stellenbosch, etc. You find the same thing. I mean, the same thing with Alex and Santel.
The DA. I hope people see what the DA is all about. It is all about white supremacy.
Hi everyone, this is Neo Lekhabo. I'm your host, and this is the Politics of Politics. This is the show that delves into the belly of South African politics. We do this by engaging with leaders from across the spectrum, political, civic, and business. And today, we've got the leader of the African Transformation Movement, Mr. Vuyolwethu Zungula. But before that, my political agenda. My political agenda is a segment of the show where I share my thoughts with you about a current topic that is trending in the media. And today I want to talk about the DA's Provincial Powers Bill. For those that have not been following, the DA is proposing a bill that they will be tabling firstly in the Western Cape, which seeks to urge the government to devolve the powers into the province. What that means is that they would like to take on some of the national competencies of government, and they want those to reside in the province. Now, I've got my own views about this thing. I think they're bloody mad, but that's not the point. I've been listening to the response from political parties, the EFF and the ANC, and there seems to be something about black political parties and the response to everything. There seems to be one thing that it's almost like it's a standard response for everything. All responses have to do with colonialism, apartheid, white people. Do we not have any other argument outside of this in order to counter some of these ridiculous claims by the DA? My view is this: do not shout, better improve your argument. There's a lot of arguments that you can use to counter this issue. Firstly, you may very well ask the DA, what have they done currently with the powers that they have in the Western Cape to improve the lives of Capetonians, right? There was a point where the matriculants in the Western Cape, in terms of pass rate, they were in the top 2 in the country. Now they're sitting at about number 5. They've got a competence to that. They closed a hospital in Nyanga a few years back, and they said they'll build another one. 10 years down the line, there's still no hospital. So why is it that we are unable to raise strong arguments or counter arguments or improve our arguments every time we get into conversation? It gives me a bloody headache every single time when we're supposed to be debating an issue and all I hear is colonialism and apartheid and right-wing politics. It makes us look like we are unable to understand the intricacies and politics that our country is faced with at the moment. Now, the DA could counter the argument as well. If I was the DA, this is the argument I would be giving. Section 9 of the Constitution allows me to bring such a motion. Schedule 4 of the Constitution also allows me that within the separation of powers between national, provincial, and local, that some of these competences I am able to share with the government. At least 55% of all agricultural exports come out of my Western Cape. Therefore, it makes sense that I must not be constrained by the incompetence of transport and Transnet in general at the harbour. And I could also argue that my people are unable to go to work from the townships because Transnet doesn't have rail. And from that perspective, I would like to be able to give the Capetonians a better life. I'm saying there could be an argument either way for this issue. But I really, really, really wish for the day where we will be able to improve our arguments as opposed to throwing old Stalin, Marxism, USSR monologues and ideologies about right-wing, white monopoly, this and whatever the case is. This bill can be defeated very, very, very simply. Let's improve our arguments. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this rain outside with Mr. Vuyolwethu Zungula. As promised, we've got Vuyolwethu Zungula in the studio to speak to us about ATM and all matters politics. But before we get into the interview, here's an insert that tells you a little bit more about the man.
Vuyolwethu Zungula. In a narrative akin to David versus Goliath, the African transformation movement leader, Vuyolwethu Zungula, emerges as an exemplary leader, spearheading the Section 89 inquiry against President Cyril Ramaphosa. Navigating constitutional complexities with finesse, Zungula accused Ramaphosa of serious misconduct, showcasing strategic acumen. The ATM, steeped in Christian conservative values since its 2018 inception, swiftly ascended, securing 2 seats in the 2019 National Assembly. Zungula, a dynamic and youthful leader at the age of 34, not only became the youngest cabinet member, but also steered his party with resilience and vision. His leadership qualities reflect a rare blend of tenacity and strategic foresight, contributing to the ATM's impactful role in national affairs.
Mr. Zungula, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Really appreciate your time. So what have you been busy with?
Campaigning.
Yes.
Door to door, going to communities, going to churches, going to royal houses, going to podcasts, basically doing everything possible to make sure that people get to know about the ATM leading up to the May elections.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think maybe let's take one step back. The African Transformation Movement. Tell us a little bit about it. I mean, you guys have been in Parliament since 2019. What most people do not know is that you guys are the ones that started, the processes for the Section 89 impeachment for President Ramaphosa with regards to the Phala issue. You guys are punching above your weight.
Look, in our view as a party, there's a lot of things that we've done in the past 5 years. Obviously, the question relating to Phala, because it relates to the conduct of the president, is the one thing that many people know ATM about. But there's a lot of things when it comes to accountability we have addressed. Now, a lot of people assume that there's only 3 parties in Parliament. The rest need to follow the wind, of which we as a party, we do not fall into that kind of thinking. We are of the view that as long as we're there in Parliament, if we've got the power to raise a motion, to submit a motion, we need to do it, even if there's only 2 of us in Parliament, because we're not there to just add the numbers or follow the lead of the 3 big parties, but we are there to serve the people in accordance to what the Constitution requires.
And I mean, I think on this matter, you've done that very well. But tell us a little bit, who's Vuyolwethu Zungula and how did the whole African transformation movement come about?
Yeah, so Vuyolwethu Zungula is a young black South African who went to school, had difficulties completing his qualification because of lack of funding, went to work in a predominantly white company, so was able to see how racism is in a white-dominated company, but was very involved in terms of student movements, Christian organizations. That is how ATM came about, because it came about the indigenous churches in our country wanting to have a voice, wanting to have a say in terms of how government is actually running. Because what the ruling party used to do was to go to the African indigenous churches to ask for votes. After they receive votes, they do not go to these churches for consultation. You'll recall when there was COVID and there was the lockdown, more often than not, the president of the country, when he wanted to consult with the faith sector, he spoke with predominantly the mainline churches, and the indigenous churches were left behind. So that is how ATM came about. But when ATM was introduced to the people, people said, we do not want another Christian party. We want a party for everyone. That is why you find there's traditional healers, there's royal houses. We welcome everyone, because our view is, as a party, let's build the type of character that we want South Africans to have. And then we are able now to address some of the systematic problems, because some of the problems that we find in our country, their root cause is the type of a South African that we have. I'll make an example. The question of corruption. We have all of the systems to detect and prevent corruption, but because you've got people that are inherently corrupt within them, they'll always want to find a way to bypass all of those mechanisms. So that is why it becomes important as we deal with the issues such as your crime, your unemployment, and your economic issues. But let's also build the type of South African so that we've got a proper identity of what it is to be a South African. For example, if you go to Germany, when you get there and you want German citizenship, even though you may qualify, but you need to write a test because they want to infuse a certain value system so that you're not only German by having the citizenship, but by heart you're not German. So, but when it comes to South Africa, we don't have an identity which we would want to be proud of. So that is why it becomes important, in our view, the issue of a faith-based organization, a values-driven organization that will inculcate the type of values that we need in society.
I hear you, but then your sponsorship of the party by the churches, by the South African Council of Messianic Churches in Christ, does that not cast a doubt on your credibility, on the ability for you to be impartial and represent all South Africans, regardless of which faith they belong to? Because within that band of churches, there's a lot of churches that are not, or faiths rather, that are not represented. Do you not think that that casts a doubt on your impartiality in terms of being a president for everybody?
Not at all. For example, I'm going to engage with traditional healers who do not even belong in the Council of Messianic Churches, simply because by the manner in which we've conducted ourselves in Parliament, we've clearly shown that we're a party that is open to everyone. But our foundations, it is the foundations of faith, foundations of a value system. And we all agree that we need people who are values-driven in our society. For example, the value of Ubuntu. We want leaders that have Ubuntu, because there's no way you could have that inherent value of Ubuntu and still be corrupt, because Ubuntu means you are because of other people. You are a leader, you are a president because of the country. Now, you can't be corrupt if that value is not something that you only speak about, but it is something you live by. So that is whereby the question of the value system comes about, and it becomes important because we want South Africa to be values-driven, so that, because you can't have a corrupt society and you think that corrupt society is going to produce leaders, which is members of parliament, that are not corrupt.
But then, Vuyo, so the church, though, has lost credibility completely over many issues. And one of those is the fact that it is the same church for the past 30 years that has been giving people of this country the ANC. Every time a leader of the ANC goes into any of the churches and start promising all sorts of things, the church at large, with South African citizens, continue to voting for them. It's coming across to me as if the church is just gullible to any politician. And therefore, why should we trust a party that is church-led to produce a different result?
The churches are organizations or institutions that are very patient. That is why you find that even though the ruling party came to them, asked for votes, and they used to give them votes, but they used to counsel them, they used to guide them, they used to reprimand them. I'll make mention of Professor Sizanongunga of TCC, who used to reprimand every time.
The chief apostle.
Yeah, the chief apostle.
Yes.
Reprimand the ANC leaders when it comes to how they are governing the country. The only issue that we have when it comes to churches is that they are only in the spotlight, only when there's negative issues. But the good work that is done by churches, there's rarely any focus or any discussion as to this is the positive contribution the churches are making in terms of the country. And when it comes to politics, the issue of the churches holding the executive accountable, speaking out, inviting them to services, and when they are there, these leaders being told to go, but they're leading the country astray, sometimes that does not make it to the news. However, I want to guarantee you, most of the churches that support ATM are churches that have been reprimanding the ANC, up until they said enough is enough. Now the direction is that let us create our own organization whereby you've got people that are fearful of God, that respect people, that will govern the people correctly, not what we see now.
So, and I don't want to put you in a spotlight where I expect you to speak on behalf of all the churches. But if you look at the ANC had their January 8th statement in Mpumalanga, President Cyril Ramaphosa was in a church, he was welcomed. It's just a matter of time until they pitch up in Moria during Easter, same story. What is it about churches that, why is it so hard for churches to unite on a position? By the way, the churches have united on a position before during apartheid. And their position was very clear to say, this is an evil system, these are evil leaders, and we will take our horizontal relationship, vertical relationship with God and apply it horizontally with men. And we cannot serve God in an unjust society. You have an unjust society today, but the church doesn't seem to be united as it was during apartheid. So in your network of churches, what is their position regarding the suffering of people and the fact that it has been brought about by the ANC?
Many of the churches in our networks, they are very supportive of the ATM. But if you're going to talk about the church in a broad sense, obviously you are going to have people that are benefiting from the current government. That is why you're going to find it difficult for those people to actually move away from, from a place where they benefit and come to, for example, the ATM. There's many organizations in which we spoke to, they agreed 100% to say, what you are raising, it is actually correct. However, most of the people who pay tithes in our church are members of a certain political party, so we do not want, to ruin those relations. So those are a small group of people, yes, within the church. And again, in the church, you don't find perfect people. The church is not by no means a perfect institution whereby you get perfection. It is an institution, in my view, of abantu that are sick, who know that they are sick, but they go there for whatever kind of healing, whether it is emotional, spiritual healing. Therefore, you are not going to have a church that is perfect. However, what we need to applaud the churches that support ATM, it is them taking a stand and moving away from a corrupt relationship with this ruling party that says, if you continue encouraging your members to vote for the ruling party, we are going to employ some of your members, or you as a leader are going to give you this money, because this is what happens. It does not only happen in the church, it also happens in the royal houses, whereby that agrees that abantu bakhe bayasokola. But because there is that benefit for him as an individual, he will turn a blind eye on the people suffering in order for him to benefit from the ruling party.
Okay, so one of the issues that South Africans are raising is there's too many parties, and it looks like the ballot paper is going to be a ballot book. How different is the ATM from the political parties that are currently on the scene?
Critically, the ATM is here to reset the system. There's so many parties that are embedded on the political system of our country that will never take us anywhere. The political system of patronage, of being funded by wealthy funders to an extent whereby when you are in government or in parliament, you don't represent the aspirations of the people. You represent the aspiration of whoever that is funding you. The politics of people scheming around all because they want power. So that is not what the ATM represents, because the ATM, 2019, when we made our mark, people were like, but who is this Vuyolwethu Zungula? We don't know him. And they expected us to fail. But if you look at the past 5 years in Parliament, you see that ATM has truly represented the people, because we are not funded by people. We are not funded by these funders and these companies and foreign agents. Secondly, it is part of our DNA to put the interests of the people first, and we owe no one to an extent whereby, because there's people or parties whereby these parties are funded, for example, by companies that are Jewish companies. You find that on this Israel and Palestine conflict, those parties are not going to reprimand or call out the atrocities committed by Israel, because they are afraid of losing their funding. So when it comes to ATM, you've noticed that where there's rand manipulation, the issue of the porous borders, the issue of the load shedding, we've managed to be vocal on all issues that are affecting the citizens because we owe our allegiance to the citizens and to no one.
Let's talk about that point of funding. And I know this point is the point that South Africans are passionate about. If we are saying that the parties in parliament, look, politics is expensive, democracy is expensive, everybody is funded. There is no one who's not funded. And simply because it is expensive to actually have your message out there, right?
But the question is, at what cost?
Fair enough. But what I'm saying is that, is it not unfair to say, just because I am funded by X, therefore I am doing X's bidding, right? I mean, take yourself, for instance, right? I mean, the chief apostle bought you a 4x4, right? And a Mercedes-Benz. Would it be fair for someone to say you are captured? I don't know if that is fair to say just because someone is funding you, therefore you're doing their bidding.
You know, Thomas Sankara put it very nicely, said, whoever funds you controls you. Now, the question or the issue that we've realized as a party is that in Parliament, many of these parties have got similar funders, and it is the wealthy funders that control the entire economy of our country, an economy that needs to be transformed. Therefore, most of these parties are not going to be pro the transformation of the economy because it would hurt their funders. And also the funders would be uncomfortable to fund a party that wants to transform the system. However, they would be fine to fund a party that will keep the system as it is. So that is where the question of funding comes about. However, with us as a party, if you were to observe or compare us with a party maybe that is not even in parliament, you can see by the amount of posters they have, by the amount of airtime they have, by the amount of money they are able to pay as stipends to their members compared to us, simply because they've got money to spend, and the cost of getting the money means selling out on them standing in parliament or in any platform on behalf of the people. Whereas when it comes to us, we said we do not want to have any money from these corporates or these foreign agents because it would come at a cost of us not being genuine to the people. I've seen in parliament whereby when people are making political speeches in the villages and the townships, they speak one thing. But when they need to vote on a matter in parliament, they vote differently to what they've been promising the people, simply because the funders are the ones that dictate the agenda for many political parties. The prime example now, it is this Israel and Palestine conflict. You can see what Israel is doing to Palestinians. But look at the parties that are refusing to call out Israel. And look at their funders. They've got similar funders, which clearly paints a picture that if we do not address the funding issue, citizens are going to think they are funding or they are voting for people to represent them, only to find that they are voting for proxies that actually represent the interest of whoever that is funding them.
I think what I'm saying is that everyone is funded.
We are also funded, like I said, but by our people. There is no one that can have a claim to us. Hence, you find that there's a difference between receiving 5 million from one person and receiving 5 million from 5 million citizens who are going to give you R1 each. Because those 5 million citizens, if a person says, do this or I want my money back, you can easily give them that R1. But this one person who gives you 5 million has got so much power over you. So that is why you find that some of these political players, you find that you can see it is not actually them that is speaking, but it is whoever that is funding them. But when it comes to us as the ATM, the chief apostle did donate to the organization. But if you check, whenever the church is doing something we do not agree with, we're able to say, but the church can improve in this aspect. But when it comes to these particular funders, on the question, for example, of the transformation of the banking sector, if someone is funded by banks, they can never push for a state bank because it will hurt the funder. So that is, for us, the crux of the matter.
You're saying there's an inherent conflict of interest, whichever way one looks at it, right? So what is the ATM's position on the economy?
We, as an organization, view that, firstly, the manner in which the economy is structured it is structured in a manner that allows only a few handful players to participate meaningfully. If you were to look at all of the industries, whether it is the banking, financial services, it is telecommunications, almost all industries in our country are dominated by or controlled by between 5 and 7 companies who have over 90% of the market share. So that is the nature of the economy. The other problem is that the economy, it is an economy that relies mostly on imports. We import a lot of things as a country. Therefore, our position as a party, number one, there needs to be a gradual shift in terms of ensuring that the money that the government spends goes more on small businesses instead of the big corporate companies, because these big corporates are having more than 90% of the market share. More than 80% of the government spending goes to big companies. So that is what we are saying, that needs to change. The second thing that needs to change is that the industries need to be opened up in order to have more players and have diverse players in the economy, to an extent whereby you can't have Botswana with less than 3 million citizens having more than 10 commercial banks, but come to South Africa with supposedly 62 million citizens, but we have 5 or 6 commercial banks. There needs to be more players, and for that to happen, the gatekeeping needs to be removed, and there needs to be a change in legislation in order to allow for new players, not the legislation that we have now, whereby it is keeping away most of the new entrants who want to enter into some of these markets.
The gatekeeping happens on 2 fronts. The first one is the incumbents, definitely, but the incompetence of our government to be able to create an environment where entrepreneurs can thrive. Unless you are close to the ANC, you will not be able to get a license to anything, right? So how do you then deal with those issues? Firstly, the incumbents, which is the current big players that you're talking about who playing gatekeeping. And secondly, the idea that for you to succeed, you must be close to those in power. And if you criticize them, you're a clever black who should actually not even be in this country.
The point of departure should be to remove the ANC government come these elections, because there's no way good governance, opportunities for entrepreneurs can coexist with the ANC government. They've shown for the past 30 years that their only interest, it is them benefiting as individuals. That is why you are also saying that if ever there's a contract, if ever there's a license, the bottom line, they are going to ask, what's in it for me? So the point of departure, it is to remove the ANC government, and you insert a government that will be able to change the legislation. Legislation is critical because without the law, you've got nothing to base your political ideas on. I want to make an example about apartheid. Apartheid, whenever there was a political idea to separate the blacks and the whites, there was a law as well to black people are not allowed to live in a certain area. That is how people got to be displaced to other areas, because the government was responding to a certain law. But come to our country now, the government is not equally creating laws to implement their political ideas. For example, we've got an untransformed banking sector, but the government has got a law at all of these state-owned entities, departments, municipalities can only bank in the commercial banks. Meaning, even if you are in KZN, there's a municipality, there's the Itala Bank, you would want that bank to grow. The law prohibits you as that municipality from banking with Itala Bank. That is why you find that even BVS crumbled, because the law was on the side of the big commercial banks. So that is why, in our view, we're saying that remove the ANC, put in place legislation that speaks to implement your political ideas.
I think the issue around banking, it is the government's admission that we are corrupt and we are thieves, and therefore bank somewhere else. And let me tell you why I say that. If you look at how many times the land bank has collapsed, right? And if you look at the people that owed the land bank, which most of them are ANC parliamentarians, whether you look at Itala, whether you look at VBS actually did not collapse because of the law. It collapsed because of corruption, right? The money was there, but people stole the money. So it was not the law. So I accept situations where You've got a law that makes it very difficult for people to start a bank. But when you look at the number of Ponzi schemes over the years, right? And when you look at anything that the state touched, it crumbles, right? I think from that perspective, you can't say just because people stole money from VBS Bank, it is not the people, it is the law.
The point I'm making is the reason why many companies in the banking sector are unable to reach the level of being commercial banks is that the law prohibits some of the state interventions, in the sense that you have a government department, a municipality, instead of them, which is this municipality banking with FNB, which is a big, well-known commercial bank, the law should allow that municipality to go and bank with Itala Bank. In other words, create diverse players in the banking sector and improve or increase the hold of the financial resources of this Itala Bank. But because the law is prohibiting, it means money now, when it comes to banking, is going to circulate amongst these 5 or 6 banks instead of encouraging the various players in the sector. So that is why the law needing to be transformed becomes important, so that you don't have a case of having innovation, having potential when it comes to black people, but now law becomes a stumbling block to say, you as government, because remember, we're a developing country. So most of what needs to be done by government. There needs to be state intervention. Now, if the state itself has laws that prevents itself from intervening in some of these industries or some of the economic sectors, then it means the state is failing itself.
Sure. So everything that the state has touched by way of commercialization has failed, okay? Whether it's Transnet, whether it's Eskom, and I can go on with this list. Why would you still even advocate for a state bank?
Look, there's a difference between the state as an entity when it's in right hands, as well as the ANC government. Because if, for example, we're talking about Eskom, I think between 2015, 2016, Eskom was making billions. So it has not always been the case that the SOEs are dysfunctional and they are running at losses. Similar with SAA, your DNL, we used to have many state-owned entities that are successful.
Yes.
But once now you have people at the helm of these entities, as well as the political leadership, that does not have the best interests of the country, then you are going to see some of these entities failing. So our view is to say, do not now take power away from the state because of the failures of these ANC people, as well as their cronies in government, but capacitate the state, especially in a developing country. You need to have the state play a critical role. That is why we also speak about the public service being professional, so that whoever gets to be a manager, a CEO, the board, it is people who are there on merit, rather than people who are there because of the connections and proximity to the political players that be. And most importantly, you need to have very strong-willed individuals, so that if there's political pressure, they are able to withstand the political pressure, because we know that the political pressure that is applied by some of these ministers is the reason why some of these SOEs are failing.
You also think foreigners must go back?
We are saying as an organization, we are a country, and a country is defined by having borders, the integrity of the National Population Register. Therefore, if a person wants to come to South Africa, they must come legally so, because on the question of national security, immediately you've got people that you do not even know, you can't even trace them. When they commit crimes, you can't even check them, you can't even solve those crimes, and people, which is the victims, are not going to be able to have justice. You'll recall there was a shooting in Soweto whereby more than 10 people were killed in one sitting. Those guns there were found to have been trafficked from another country, neighboring country. Meaning, if we are going to have porous borders, then it means we are opening the country to be vulnerable towards security risks. Now, if a person comes here legally on a work space, they are providing a skill we don't have as a country. That is well and good. But we can't have a case whereby everyone, whether they are coming from Asia, from America, from Europe, they are going to flock to South Africa, fight for scarce resources, because that creates a conflict now between the people as well as the visitors. Now, it is the duty of government to prevent any kind of that conflict by managing the borders, being very strict on the companies that are employing people who are in the country illegally, so that instead of a person attacking the scooter driver that is driving Checkers 60 something, but it is Checkers that must be held accountable to say, how are you employing this person? Because they're not providing a scarce skill.
One of the arguments is that our cost of labor is too high.
No, the question of the cost of labor, whether it's too high, it is coming up because black people want to be paid equal to the white people. Because for the longest time, black people, South Africans, have been paid peanuts. That is why there was even the introduction of the minimum wage. So what now these companies are doing, they want to dislocate black South Africans from the economy because black South Africans are pro-transformation and they want to be paid what they are worth. And they are going to take a vulnerable person from another country simply because that person cannot fight for their rights. So the issue of now illegal immigration and them being employed in the companies is actually reversing the gains of the national minimum wage, as well as the progress that has been made in terms of our labor laws, because you'll recall that our labor has been pro-capital for the longest time. So that is why you find that when these companies want to take shortcuts, exploit people, they are going to look for vulnerable illegal immigrants because they've got nowhere to run.
No, but I think you're oversimplifying the issue. I think at the level of, say, management or professional jobs, I would hear your argument around ensuring that black people get paid the same as white people. I think when you start going into the waiters, waitresses, etc., there really is no debate about black people or scooter drivers. There really is no debate about black people and white people. I've never seen, maybe they are there, but I've never seen a lot of Uber drivers that are delivering peace and they're white people. I think that there's a lot of inefficiencies in the system and corruption. People live far from their places of work. People have to compensate for the lack of electricity and end up having, buying all sorts of, batteries, etc., etc. The price of food is high. You've got an economy that is mismanaged, whereby the money that would have been enough, it's not enough. So I don't necessarily think that it's only the issue of racial parity in terms of salaries. And before I let you respond, maybe you can also talk about this. I mean, you advocating, for instance, that there needs to be certain areas where only South Africans can live. So I'm assuming it's linked to that whole idea of being close to place of work, etc.
Yeah. Look, on the question of the salaries, black and whites, it is what used to happen. Up until now, you found that the laws were very clear to say equal work, equal pay. Now, what do these big white corporates want to do? They want to lay off a black South African who is going to demand certain, that they work a certain number of hours a week, and they need to be paid so much, have UIF and all of those things. And they are going to want to employ someone who can basically exploit. You know, in the farms that people, they are paid even in alcohol. They are paid even in food. And that is now these companies or these individuals exploiting. So what we do not want now as a party is the system of exploitation being allowed through the question of porous borders. To prevent any kind of exploitation, you need to manage the movement of people, number one. Number two, the government needs to be very, very harsh when it comes to the companies that are employing people so that they get to employ people in accordance to the law. Instead of citizens fighting non-citizens, Okuba, why are you working there? You're not supposed to work there, because that is something that is violent and we don't agree with. That is why advocating for the government to govern. Now, on the question of the living spaces, we're of the view as a party that when apartheid happened, they took away black people and they placed them in areas furthest away from places of economic activity. That is why you find Okoba, a person is going to stay in Hammanskraal or Harankoa, and they need to drive a long distance or take a taxi, spend a lot of time in the taxi going to work. Now, that has got problems in the sense that they can't spend time with their families. They're spending so much time and money on taxis. Therefore, you need now to transform the inner city. inner city must be a place whereby there's decent accommodation to house all of these people that are working in the inner city. Because currently in the inner city, there's hijacked buildings. There's buildings whereby people are trafficked there. There's forced prosecution. So to deal with that problem, expropriate all of these hijacked buildings, convert them either into student residences or world-class living facilities in order to make people to be close to the areas of economic activity.
Well, Cape Town is addressing, the DA in Cape Town is addressing the issues of the borders. They want the Western Cape to be a country.
No, those ones are playing. The DA, I hope people see what the DA is all about. It is all about white supremacy. Because if you look at the structure of the Western Cape, go to Khayelitsha, go to Enyanga, go to Egugulethu, go to Philippi, look at the quality of life our people are exposed to there versus your Stellenbosch and the other areas in the Western Cape. Because the DA focuses now on the white communities, and black communities are places whereby Abantu are not living well. So when the DA wants now to leave South Africa and become an independent state, the first thing, let's look at who is funding, who is behind the entire thing. This is driven by a British foreigner, for that matter, of which that person should not be even allowed to participate in the politics of our country. And secondly, it can never work, because if you look at the rich history of our country, Jan van Riebeeck, all of them, they landed there, and their dispossession and all of the painful things, they started to dislocate people in the Western Cape, leading to the Eastern Cape and the other areas. Therefore, it can't be now that they've taken the economic control of the country, they are of the Western Cape. They are going to say, black people, stay in your South Africa, we are going to keep...
That's because we have failed. We have continued to vote for a failed party. We have continued to become incompetent when we are given responsibility. And as a result, we have created a notion that none of us are smart enough or competent enough to lead. The issue of disparity between Khayelitsha and and Stellenbosch, etc. You find the same thing. I mean, the same thing with Alex and Santen. The same thing with Mlazi and Balito. It's not a DA thing, and which leads me to my next question. In all likelihood, we may have a coalition this year in the elections, depending on how things go. What is your view on a coalition government?
A coalition must be based on a program of action. We're of the view that what comes first is what do we want to do for the people, in the sense that we're saying land expropriation without compensation, state bank, local production. Let's agree on what needs to be done. And then the question of who gets now to be president, who gets to be minister, comes later, because we find that more often than not, many parties base the discussion of a coalition based on they allocate positions among themselves and the people come secondary. So in our view, the people must come primary by discussing the program of action. And then after, we get to decide, if, for example, we're going to be talking about the agricultural revolution, which we as an organization were saying, everywhere where there's Arab land in our country, people must farm so that you reduce the cost of the prices of food, and you've got a food security that is based on the people, not that is based on...
What happens if the majority of the coalition partners do not agree with some of your held policies? For an example, land expropriation without compensation. Would you still join that coalition?
Then there's no coalition, because the reason why there's so much dysfunctionality in the local municipalities, it is because there's no coherence in terms of policy and ideology. So in our view, if we want to get things right, let's put people first. How do we put people first? By deciding on a program of action that we want to embark on that is going to get the country working. And once that program of action has been decided, then you come back and you see, all right, ATM, you've been very vocal and very articulate on the issue of the farming revolution. Take this particular department. You've been very clear on the issue of home affairs. Take this particular department. Then you are going to have a functioning coalition. But once you start allocating positions, and now the policies come later, then you are going to see what we see at local government, which is the conflict that we see.
My man, I'm not putting my money in a state bank to fund comrades and their side chicks.
That is why you need to vote them out.
Fantastic. Can we make sure that that happens?
If you vote out, people don't understand what's going to happen, the best thing that are going to happen in the country once the ANC is voted out. Because once the ANC is no longer in power, then all of these criminal networks that you see will no longer enjoy political protection. And therefore, they are going to crumble on their own. And you know what they say, new broom sweeps cleaner. So people are now going to act right because they know they do not enjoy political protection.
So all of these powerful business network guys that won't be protected by the ANC anymore, so their chicks will be available now.
Everyone, look, for example, how Mr. Ramaphosa managed to raise $1 billion for his own internal campaign. It is simply because those people were investing in him so that by the time he gets to be president of the country, he will use his powers in a manner that will benefit them. Now, immediately you remove all of these people that are basically the proxies of these corrupt private sector, then the entire system is going to collapse because you are going to have new people. Even those new people, they are going to be fearful of doing the wrong things because they know if they do the similar thing, they are also going to be voted out. So if there's one thing that can make South Africa to prosper, it is people voting out the ANC by actually going out and vote, not to stay in their homes and say they are not going to vote for another party. They need to take their responsibility to shape the direction of the country by voting. Whether we like it or not as a citizen, you are going to be governed. Now, I would advise as a citizen, rather fight to be governed by someone who you share the same ideals with, you share the same values, you share the same sentiments with, instead of you allowing yourself to be governed just by anyone.
Mr. Zungula, thank you very much. Appreciate your time, sir.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. That was Mr. Vuyolwethu Zungula, the president of the African Transformation Movement. You've heard their policies, you've heard their views on different matters. Please follow them on their social media platforms and on their website. We want to create an informed citizenship going into the 2024 elections and beyond. Join us on all our social media networks, follow us, and this episode will be available on YouTube as well as Spotify. Remember, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you.